Welcome everybody to the International Safeguarding Conference. Welcome to 134 participants from around 30 countries. It feels like a long time and even longer if we consider the many online meetings since we started to prepare this conference. We, Tina Campbell, Alessandra Campo, Andrew Azzopardi, Simon Davis in Melbourne, and myself, Hans Zollner, are happy that we are finally here after having postponed the conference from last year. And we are happy that at least all of us can be here in person in Rome, and so many of you are online with us now. The absence of many international conference opportunities since the onset of the pandemic has shown that yes, it is necessary that we continue with this kind of activities, even if we can meet only virtually. There have been other initiatives, such as the Harvard Symposium in April this year, or the colloquium organized by the Jesuit provinces in Africa, and many other activities. These have all been online, and much has been going on: webinars, workshops, conferences. The International Safeguarding Conference has tried to be innovative in establishing post-webinar working groups, which have been focused on presenting outcomes of the discussion following the respective webinars. Thank you very much also from my side to the facilitators of the working groups, most of whom have been outstanding in their generosity in terms of their time and their energy spent. Our conference takes place in a different context as compared to 2 years ago, when the last safeguarding conference, called the Anglophone Safeguarding Conference, was held here in Rome. Much has changed in terms of what was going on since 2 years, what has emerged from Rome. Most importantly, the new law, the motu proprio Vos Estis Lux Mundi, from 1st of June 2019, which changed church legislation with regard to cover-up by bishops and religious superiors, the removal of the pontifical secret in December 2019, the issuing of the so-called vademecum by the Congregation for Doctrine of Faith that should help all those who are in charge of leading investigations in the church and the superiors in the church to follow church rules, norms, and to implement them. Finally, only 4 weeks ago, the promulgation of the Book 6, the part that deals with the penal law and the Code of Canon Law, which includes all those changes that have happened over the last 12 years to canon law. Now, what does that mean for safeguarding in general? For safeguarding in our church, in our institutions, in our diocese, in the bishops' conferences, and in religious provinces. There were other important developments, like the establishment of a Vatican task force that should help bishops' conferences that have not updated their guidelines with regard to safeguarding or have not yet established any guidelines. This initiative is led by Andrew Azzopardi, and we are happy that we have him on our team. The initiatives of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors that work together, especially with the UISG, had a positive outcome with encouraging results for the religious globally. The decision to establish an International Safeguarding Conference was prompted especially by one observation following the Anglophone Safeguarding Conferences over the years. We found that these meetings were somehow standalone events, and every year the most important figures from the safeguarding world, the practitioners from many countries, came together. It was important that we met, that there was an exchange, that there was discussion, that there was information and formation. However, in between those meetings for another 12 months, there didn't seem to be much interaction, and there was no follow-up, neither to the topics that were addressed in the respective conferences, nor with regard to sharing of best practices. So our goal as International Safeguarding Conference is primarily that we can have an exchange in conversations and discussions over time, that there is the opportunity to share best practices so that we implement something that for the Catholic Church surprisingly seems to be very difficult. That is, bringing together people from different parts of the world, from different countries and cultures, from different languages, for sharing what they find most helpful in their work in safeguarding. So we want to further the ongoing collaborative exploration of working together. We stand for bringing people together in partnership and in shared learning. And we hope that this conference, this virtual conference, but hopefully in the future also in-person meetings, will help us really to make progress in this sense. This is why the webinars that have been organized over the past months built upon each other, and the working groups after each of the webinars had a specific focus on presenting concrete outcomes. An overview of the webinars will follow now, and the first to present that will be Dr. Alessandra Campo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Zoner, for your introduction and your support over these months for the hard work we have carried out together with the International Safeguarding Conference Committee, but also with all other people who have collaborated with us, the already mentioned facilitators, and of course, the keynote speakers. I have the honor of starting this overview on the webinars, which have prepared this final conference. And I will do that trying to give a feedback on not only on the presentation offered by Baroness Sheila Hollins with their presentation on the pandemic and people at high risk, but also trying to give a few indications on these outcomes that really we received from the work done by the very active and interactive working groups which have followed the different webinars. I must say that I'm very looking forward to listening to what Professor Sheila Baroness Hollins will say tomorrow on the basis of the feedback she got from the working groups. But I can already give, yes, as I said, an overview on what it has been said by all those who have been involved in this reflection. First of all, I must say that Professor Hollins' presentation has been a very touching one, very moving, I would say, focusing on people at high risk, especially disabled children, in the light of a very difficult time, the one of the pandemic. A reflection about how the difficult conditions linked to the pandemic, lockdowns, social distancing and other restrictions. So how all these elements have had a very difficult impact on particularly vulnerable people. What's very interesting by going through the outcomes offered by the different working groups, and interesting enough, although they were involving people from very different geographical and cultural regions, some outcomes are very similar. So are really an occasion of, I would say, universal and global reflection. The main thing, the main issue, I think, is that vulnerability is something that not only concerns vulnerable people. Vulnerability is something that concerns us as community, not only as church, but as human community in general. Is indeed an anthropological issue. And this becomes clear when we address, as Professor Hollins' presentation did, the difficulties experienced by vulnerable people, especially disabled people and disabled children, while trying to communicate to others, to express themselves. This was particularly at the center of the reflections made by the working groups. Most of the reflections were about how participants have been impressed by the fact that they do not feel ready and prepared to deal with this issue. That many communities, not only within the church, indeed should deepen their knowledge, experience, understanding of the difficulties experienced by vulnerable people as those about whom Professor Hollins has spoken. And indeed, this makes clear that their vulnerability is not something like a label that characterizes them as such, but is somehow our responsibility in the sense that the possibility of people and vulnerable people to express themselves, to communicate it, to be listened to, this possibility is something we have the responsibility to promote, to make possible. And the feeling of being unprepared, not ready to do that, expressed by many during the working groups, really indicate a direction, a concrete direction for projects, improvements, best practices to be put in place. How can we learn as community, as church, but as human community in general, to create spaces for people to feel always welcome, always understood, always listened to? Are we ready to do this? Do we have not only the competences for doing that, but really the human attitude towards this? This is one of the main issues I found particularly interesting by going through and reading the outcomes of the working group. And that's why I'm really looking forward to listening the reflections that based on this, Professor Hollins will give us tomorrow at 9:30. So this just to indicate you a first path for reflection, a first possible topic to be deepened, something we have to better understand in order to grow as community, as church, in our commitment and possibly always more shared commitment to safeguarding. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tina Campbell. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you here live from Rome and to be here with my colleagues, or most of my colleagues from the International Safeguarding Conference, with the marked absence of Simon Davis, who is in Australia at the moment. I want to echo what Alessandra mentioned earlier, which is that their working groups have been inspirational in their incredible generosity. I want to thank the facilitators because I think they cannot be thanked enough. Some of them have not only led their working groups after each webinar, but they've been having additional meetings as well, which is really, really inspiring and encouraging for us. I primarily, though, want to talk about Stuart Allardyce and his webinar, which was the second one in the series. I had the pleasure of introducing Stuart, who is a former colleague of Safeguarding, based like myself normally in Scotland, where it's probably raining just now. Although I shouldn't call Stuart a former colleague, because although I no longer work for the Catholic Church in Scotland, in my current post, I'm sure that we are going to seek further opportunities to work collaboratively. Stuart is the director of Stop It Now Scotland and also a director of the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, as I'm sure you know. And I'll talk a bit more about him tomorrow afternoon when I introduce him before he joins us live for, he joins us live from Scotland for his presentation. In his webinar last month, Stuart gave an impressive and informative presentation on preventing online sexual offending against children. This is an area which, in every possible sense, we cannot get enough of in terms of information and guidance to help us tackle this really important issue. The working groups following his webinar were tasked with two key questions. Can I say, for those of you who didn't join the working groups, this was a common theme for all of us. Each keynote speaker was asked to create two specific questions linked to their webinar, and that was the way in which the facilitators were able to direct the content of the activities and discussions of the working groups. The two that Stuart gave were, why do people commit sexual offences online? And then how do we tackle prevention? What can the church do in terms of prevention? These are two critical questions and two critical points for me, but they also reflect two much bigger key areas in safeguarding, which I become increasingly aware of at a more global level. Increasingly, I hear safeguarding colleagues searching for answers to what are vast but crucial questions. So not only are we talking about why people commit sexual offences online, but we're also looking at what are the root causes of abuse. Why? What is it that motivates someone to sexually harm children and vulnerable adults? The second most important area as well is the focus on prevention. And that is a significant shift, I think, from a previous view, which was more about control, perhaps punishment as well, or how do we eradicate abuse? How do we attempt to do so is enabled, I think, by focusing on prevention. Prevention, in turn, has to focus on a culture of protection for the little ones, for children, for those who are vulnerable, but also a real priority, and one which we echo and are mindful of in our work together as the ISC, is that victims come first, and they are prevented, indeed, from further suffering. The two questions which were embraced with some enthusiasm by all the working groups. I very much enjoyed reading through the responses and then passing them on to Stuart to assist with his presentation tomorrow. I just want to focus, though, on a few key points for your own reflection, perhaps, and because I'm certain that Stuart will explore these further tomorrow. Regarding why people commit online sexual offences against children, much of the reasoning was probably what we already know. People talked about addiction, people talked about secrecy, people talked about anonymity. People talked about this being a part of the dark web, the importance of stopping talking about child pornography and talking about child sexual images online, because pornography, in terms of adult pornography, has certainly become sadly very normalized. There was a lot of interest generated in some of the groups around clergy accessing adult pornography and what could be done, and was there any research on that? And I know that we picked that up in the question session as well. I think in terms of the increase in online abuse, which has happened during this pandemic, We need to be much more aware of and ready for further disclosures of harm and abuse. We have to be mindful. We have to, as a church, be able and willing to listen to those who come forward. I do, though, want to also focus on a phrase from some of our participants in South America. One of their phrases was awareness, consolidation, and follow-up. I thought that was really helpful. And if we're looking at online abuse in terms of awareness, we know about some of the dangers, we know about the risks, and we know that people are vulnerable. But that consolidation means that we have to do something about it. So we have to have steps, we have to take action, we have to have a process. And that follow-up means that that's consistently reviewed. I want to also take those three words into this area of prevention. Prevention is not only about vigilance. It was very interesting, some of the suggestions that people offered about prevention in terms of vigilance. So, and I know that this happens in some parts of the globe, some recommended that perhaps we were more vigilant and monitored with higher security, laptops in seminaries and computers and any other mobile device that could be used to access pornography. And also not only in seminaries, but in diocesan context, in church parishes and so on. So it ranged from stricter security to a suggestion from one of the groups that actually even emojis used on WhatsApp should be censored. But I won't go there just now. I'm going to return to the idea of awareness, consolidation, and follow-up in terms of prevention. We have an increased level of awareness in our church and in our church communities, which is healthy. But that awareness is not to limit ourselves to thinking that if we don't have any reports of child abuse, we can dare to become complacent. In terms of consolidation, it's about enabling difficult conversations and finding and offering support. And how reluctant are we sometimes to allow those conversations to happen? And how often sometimes do people, even in safeguarding, take a bystander position and not actually speak out? And in terms of follow-up, it's important to continue to focus on prevention and the protection of the vulnerable. And we continue to do this work, and we continue to do this together. And I look forward tomorrow to introducing you to Stuart and to seeing what the outcomes are of our working groups. Thank you very much, and I will hand over in a minute to my colleague, Andrew Azzopardi.
Thank you very much, Tina. It's a pleasure to be with you all today in this first event of the inaugural ISC conference. We are talking to you from Rome, in a very hot Rome, as Tina pointed out. And I'm delighted to be able to describe briefly what was discussed during the first webinar, which was led by our colleague and a friend, Miss Judy Fairholm, who is a senior associate for Protect Non Foundation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly mention one point that she made, a key element of her presentation, and then go through various points that came out in the workshops, as my colleagues did. So Judy spoke about becoming a trauma-informed church and the importance of, in the way we lead our pastoral work, not only in safeguarding, but especially in safeguarding, the need to be informed and knowledgeable about trauma and the effects of trauma. And Judy framed her presentation in Hopfall's 5 essential elements in moving from responding to recovery. And these are going from safety to calmness, to connectedness, to self-efficacy, and to hope. And then obviously in the webinar, we went into a bit more detail on what each of those elements mean for the Catholic Church and how the Church can apply these to better respond to the needs of victims and the needs of members of the community. The first question that was put to the working groups was this. So in understanding trauma, including mass trauma, and building on your experiences, what are your critical learnings that can be applied to churches as they build their trauma-informed work? So that was the first question that was put to the working groups, and we got a lot of consistent answers from different parts of the world. We had one region which was based in North America, another region which was based in South America. We had a number of working groups where we joined Europe and Africa, and then we had the Asia group. So we had 5 basic groups around the world representing different regions within the church. And these are some of the answers. It was impossible to include all the answers in this few minutes that we have together, but I wanted to highlight the important points. So one group mentioned that it's important to acknowledge the existence of trauma, to identify and sufficiently support members of the community. Others said that we do not do enough to address trauma within the church. One group emphasized on the fact that we do not accompany the offending cleric, and research around the world shows that an important part of prevention of sexual abuse is actually the treatment of offenders. And this was also discussed in some detail by Stuart Allardyce in his presentation. We need to understand the context of trauma, not only as a church issue, but also as a societal issue, because the church is part of society. One group focused on the fact that my experience does not necessarily mean that it is yours, and that each person, each community, each diocese, each parish will have different experiences, and all the experiences are valid, and we need to recognize that not the same model will not always work in all the places around the world, as Father Hans was mentioning in his introduction. But models need to be adapted to the local reality, the local legislation, local customs. Another group focused on how the church can support the mental health of the community, especially within and as a result of the pandemic that is still ongoing around the world. A group focused on the fact that many governments failed the community in dealing with the pandemic, and how the church also failed the community because they were not a loving mother to the community. Another group focused on normalization and tolerance of sexual abuse, and how that is, in some communities, in some areas around the world, is becoming part of culture. And that is a concern. And another group focused on the fact that as a church, we are sadly left only at a level of urgent reaction. And there was not really a planned response to the pandemic and to the effects of the pandemic and the trauma caused by the pandemic. Most countries recorded a substantial increase in all types of violence, abuse, sexual abuse, as well as non-sexual. So moving on to the second question, which was focused on Hopeful's 5 essential elements, which I spoke about before. And the question was this: in examining the 5 elements, safety, calmness, connection, self, community, efficacy, and hope, how and where do you apply them to trauma-informed work within the church? And then there were 2 sub-questions. What is already in place that you can build upon? And the second one was, what are the possible barriers you need to overcome in order to apply these elements? And we got some very interesting responses from the working groups. I also want to thank the facilitators who are absolutely brilliant in managing the groups. And some of the groups, the problem we had was that we almost had to stop them because there was so much, they spent so much time discussing in the groups that we, at a point in some of them, we had to tell them, listen, we need to close the Zoom meeting now. But So that was really positive, the fact that there was enthusiasm to discuss these issues in the working group. So thank you for that, for each of your participation in that. So in terms of the feedback for the second question, a number of groups identified the need to improve the support given to victim survivors, and not just stop at face value, but for the church to understand how deep do we need to go to really accompany and support victims and survivors. Some groups identified the need to implement leadership training within dioceses and within religious communities. So there is an understanding that without the support of leadership, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to implement any safeguarding procedure or protocol or culture. A number of groups spoke about the importance of applying psychological first aid, which is something that Judy spoke about in her presentation, and it seems like this was picked up in a number of groups. So that's a food for thought for us all to see how that can be applied in our local church. The need to provide training, to give people a voice, to give members of community a voice, to give victims and survivors a voice. Training such as focusing on rights of individuals or on the process to investigate and how a good and sound investigation needs to take place. Some regions felt that safety was covered within their region, but are a bit concerned about complacency, as Tina mentioned earlier on. There are individuals and families who are dealing with many issues, and the church needs to be close to these people to understand what they're going through in order to be able to accompany them, in order to be the loving mother that Pope Francis asked the church to be. There are some areas, some regions, some working groups said that some of the church organizations or some of the dioceses were limited only to the church's point of view, and we need to expand that view to understand how society is viewing safeguarding, abuse of children and vulnerable adults, as well as the effect that and the role that the pandemic played in developing a safeguarding culture within our church. So not limiting ourselves to the church point of view. And as a result, there's a need to see the wider perspective. And then there was a recognition that safeguarding is a global issue and that we need to see what role the church plays in society to address the issue of safeguarding. The church can be and can play a leading role in addressing safeguarding. And sometimes we take a backbench and we react to situations rather than be leaders in the field. And we need to promote organizations, entities within the church who actually do proactively take a stand and take a key role in addressing the problem of abuse and addressing the culture of safeguarding. And the final 2 points is that we need more prevention programs. Apologies for the typo there. And that these prevention programs need to involve all pastoral workers. In other words, bishops, religious leaders, clerics, and lay people. The church is not just bishops and clerics. The church is primarily lay people. In safeguarding, we agree, there seems to be a consensus and agreement that lay people play a central role in implementing safeguarding programs. If you look at the Pontifical Commission, it is primarily lay people. If you look at the task force, the Holy Father appointed me as a lay person to coordinate. The CCP is led by lay people, is full of lay people. And we should not fall for the problem of clericalism, that we always need to have a cleric. Okay? Clerics are part of the church, of course, but so are lay people, and we need to have that balance there. So that was the feedback from the working groups around the world in discussing Judy's presentation on making the church a trauma-informed, to develop trauma-informed practice within the church. I now want to pass on to my colleague Sarah, who will be talking about the app Socio. Some of you had some questions on that. There were some questions also in the chat this morning. and Sarah will be explaining that to us.
Sure,
Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Sarah Beck. Thank you. And I work for the Center for Child Protection in Rome with Alessandra and Father Zollner. And during this conference, I'm helping out with the app Socio. So since we can't all physically be in the same space together, the app is a great aid for networking. And you can share as much or as little about yourself as you like. And if you don't want to download yet another app on your phone, you can use the web app. So among the various things you can do with the app, you can add other attendees as contacts, you can send messages, you can look at the agenda, and you can even take notes on the sessions. You can set reminders for yourself. And during the conference, we'll be adding more features and information to the app, as well as tips on how to use it. And though you'll receive much of the same information by email, in the app, you'll have it all in the same place. So since it's a lot to explain how to use it, since we only have a portion of people have signed up so far, so I won't go too much into detail, but if you've already joined the app, you can message me. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And we'll set up a way for to answer questions. So thank you, and you'll hear from me again.
So thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Father Hans. Thank you, Alessandra and Tina, and also Simon, for the amount of work you've done in the past few months to make this conference possible. So this is bringing our first welcome address to a conclusion. Just a couple of things before you rush away. There's a slight change on the Friday, on a session on Friday, on the previous agenda. We speak at 3 o'clock on the Italian time instead of 3 o'clock in the 4 o'clock. This will allow her to speak live. So we thought we'll make a slight change to allow her to be able to join us from Canada. And also, Mr. Ramos is going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have a day of keynote. We'll start with the presentations at 9:15 to 9:30. At 9:30, we're going to have the intervention from Baroness Sheila Collins, when she's going to build up on the webinar and talk about, expand further the theme and incorporate also the feedback that you gave from your working groups. So that's at 9:30. We're going to have another set of working groups at 10:30 to discuss this keynote. Then we're going to have a bit of a break. Okay, stretch your legs, go eat, and come back. At 2 o'clock, we're going to have a presentation from Cardinal Blaise Cupich with the Archbishop of Chicago. Cardinal Blaise is going to speak about protecting the flock, preventing and healing child sexual abuse. And that's going to be from 2 o'clock Rome time to 3 o'clock. Then we're going to have a short break, and at 4:15, we're going to have the second keynote, the third keynote, sorry, of the day, and we're going to have Stuart Allardyce, the director of Stop It Now, to also expand on the theme he discussed in his webinar, which is preventing online sexual offending against children. And after that, at 5:15 p.m. Italy time, we're going to have more working groups. So thank you very much for joining us. We're all very excited here and really look forward to the next 2 days of presentations and especially of your input and your discussions. Today we didn't have a lot of time to discuss because the aim was just really to introduce the conference. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and to joining in our discussions here. Thank you very much from wherever you are.